What if a powerful judge framed an innocent black girl, never realizing her father was the U.S. Attorney General, and he was about to burn the whole system down to save her? 16-year-old Cassidy Bainbrook stood quietly at the end of her driveway, waiting for the school bus just like every other weekday morning. The crisp air of spring cloud carried the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of trees. Her backpack was neatly slung over one shoulder, her earbuds in, playing one of her favorite political debate podcasts. She had a mock trial competition coming up and was preparing hard to make it to the nationals. Suddenly, a black and white patrol car pulled up to the curb, tires crunching against the gravel. Two officers stepped out, one older with a heavy jawline and graying temples, the other younger, fidgety, and clearly unsure. The older one approached her with a deadpan expression and asked for her name. "Cassidy Bainbrook," he asked flatly. She pulled out her earbuds, a little confused. "Yes, that's me." "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance," he stated coldly as he grabbed her wrists. "What? What are you talking about?" Cassidy gasped, pulling back instinctively, her heart skipping a beat. But the cuffs clicked shut before she could resist further. Her mind reeled, this had to be some kind of mistake. Other students and neighbors stopped and stared. Cell phones came out. The school bus pulled up and froze at the sight. Cassidy, a straight-A student, vice president of the debate team, and weekend library volunteer, was being shoved into a squad car like a criminal. Inside the patrol car, her breath fogged the glass. She tried to think logically, to calm down, to remember what her father always told her, stay calm. Facts first, panic later. But nothing made sense. She had never touched drugs in her life. Where could this have come from? What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that earlier that morning, someone had planted a duffel bag in the trunk of her friend's car, which she had borrowed the night before to get to a community event. The police received a tip, and that tip led straight to her. What the officers didn't know, what the judge didn't know, was who her father really was. Across town, in a secure building in Washington, D.C., Brielle Bainbrook, U.S. Attorney General, was reading over a legal reform proposal when he got the call from an unknown number in Spring Cloud. The voice on the other end was rushed, nervous. "Sir, your daughter has been arrested. You might want to come here. It's serious." Brielle didn't move at first. His hand tightened slightly around the phone. Then, with a calm and deliberate tone that masked the fire building inside him, he simply said, "Send me the full report. I'll be there before sunrise." Cassidy sat in the cramped holding cell of the Spring Cloud Juvenile Detention Center, still wearing her school uniform. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the room smelled faintly of bleach and despair. She clutched her knees to her chest, her eyes red and puffy from crying, though she had stopped making a sound hours ago. The shock was starting to dull, replaced by a surreal numbness. No one had explained anything beyond the brief accusation, just that she'd been found in possession of a controlled substance. She didn't even know what that substance supposedly was. Outside the cell, two officers conversed in hushed tones with a woman in a tan pantsuit, her court-appointed public defender. His name was Benton Denton, a man in his late 50s with the energy of someone who'd stopped caring 10 years ago. He didn't even look her in the eyes when they first met. Instead, he sighed and opened a worn leather briefcase. At the preliminary hearing the next morning, Cassidy was escorted into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit that hung awkwardly off her slender frame. She looked out into the nearly empty gallery, no familiar faces. Her father hadn't arrived yet. She tried to steady her breath, but her pulse raced. Sitting at the bench was Judge Grace Calloway, a woman known in local circles for her harsh sentencing, particularly toward minority youth. Her silver blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her gavel seemed to rest closer to her hand than necessary. She didn't bother looking at Cassidy for long before diving into the arraignment. The defendant was found in possession of approximately 1 kilogram of methamphetamine, the prosecutor declared. She was the sole person with access to the vehicle in which the drugs were found. We ask for her to remain in detention without bail due to flight risk and the gravity of the charges. Cassidy's mouth fell open slightly. Methamphetamine? A kilogram? She couldn't even begin to comprehend how that got into the car. And yet her lawyer didn't object. Denton merely stood and mumbled, "We request leniency due to the defendant's clean record and status as a minor," without any effort, passion, or attempt to argue the absurdity of the accusation. Judge Calloway's eyes narrowed as she glanced over the case file. The seriousness of the crime outweighs the defendant's age or academic standing. Bail is denied. She will remain in custody pending trial. The gavel slammed down like a gunshot. Cassidy's heart broke in that moment. Her world, a world of textbooks, speeches, and teenage dreams, collapsed into a cold, steel cage of uncertainty and fear. Back in her cell, she cried quietly, replaying every second in her mind, trying to find the point where her life had gone off course. She still didn't understand how this was possible. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't some thug. She was just a girl who loved the Constitution, who wanted to be a civil rights lawyer someday. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Brielle Bainbrook had already boarded a private government jet, having reviewed every legal document tied to the case. He had stayed silent through every briefing, his jaw clenched, eyes dark and calculating. When his aide asked if he'd like to issue an internal request to pause the case through executive authority, Brielle only said, "No. Let it proceed. I want them to believe they've won, until it's too late." Judge Grace Calloway sat behind her massive mahogany desk in chambers, sipping from a crystal glass of mineral water and leafing through another juvenile case file. Her office was adorned with classical paintings and accolades, an air of authority carefully curated over 2 decades. She had built her reputation on being tough on crime, especially when it came to youth offenders. In her private mind, she didn't believe reform worked, only fear and punishment did. What most people didn't know, what she had gone to great lengths to bury, was that her courtroom served more than justice. It served profit. Over the past 7 years, Calloway had developed an untraceable arrangement with Vantel Youth Holdings, a private corrections firm that ran the local juvenile detention facility. For every minor she sentenced to the center, the company funneled generous, consulting fees into offshore accounts linked to shell corporations. No one had ever questioned it. No one had dared. Until now. As she casually reviewed Cassidy Bainbrook's file again, she saw exactly what she wanted, a clean-cut girl with no record, an easy win. An unspoken rule in her courtroom was that the more promising the defendant, the harsher the fall. "Make examples out of the good ones," she had once told a colleague in jest. She believed it prevented others from testing the system. What she didn't see in the case file, what she didn't know, was who Cassidy's father was. But across town, that very man was sitting in the back seat of a black SUV, driven by a federal marshal. Brielle Bainbrook's expression was unreadable, his dark suit crisp, his U.S. Attorney General lapel pin discreetly removed. He didn't want anyone to recognize him yet, not until it mattered. In the folder on his lap was not only his daughter's case file, but also an investigative dossier on Judge Grace Calloway herself. His federal clearance had granted him access to sealed disciplinary records, complaints filed and mysteriously dismissed, and, most damning of all, discrepancies in sentencing patterns. Using DOJ analysts, Brielle had cross-referenced over 400 juvenile cases she presided over in the last 5 years. The numbers were shocking. Black and Hispanic defendants received on average 42% longer sentences than white defendants charged with the same crimes under Calloway's jurisdiction. Even worse, 70% of those youth had been sent to just one facility, the one operated by Vantel Youth Holdings. Brielle knew corruption when he saw it. He had dismantled drug cartels, infiltrated political conspiracies, and shut down trafficking networks. But this was personal. That evening, while Judge Calloway dined at an exclusive country club with 2 local businessmen, Brielle stood at the edge of a quiet motel room, speaking on the phone with one of his top federal investigators. "I want every financial transaction traced. shell corporations, trusts, hidden assets. Build me a chain. I want names. I want timestamps. And I want evidence tight enough to make her regret every sentence she ever passed. Yes, sir, the agent replied. And one more thing, Briel added, his voice dropping to steel. She doesn't know it yet, but she picked the wrong girl. As the call ended, Briel looked at a photo taped inside his folder, Cassidy as a child, smiling with her missing front teeth, holding a certificate from her elementary school spelling bee. He ran a finger across it. They think she's weak, he whispered. They're about to find out who raised her. Cassidy Bainbrook lay on the thin cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling as the dim overhead light buzzed like a dying insect. Her hands, still sore from the too tight cuffs, were folded on her chest. It had been 4 days since her arrest, and she had stopped crying. Not because she was okay, but because she was adapting. Survival demanded it. Her cellmate, a quiet girl named Yolinda, barely spoke a word. The guards here didn't encourage conversation. In fact, most of them discouraged it through subtle threats or cold stares. But the real danger wasn't in silence, it was in being noticed. Cassidy had already caught the attention of Officer Elrain, a heavy-set woman with a smirk that never reached her eyes. Elrain seemed to take special pleasure in punishing girls who thought they were better than everyone else. And Cassidy, with her articulate speech, polished manners, and refusal to cower, fit that category perfectly. On her second night, Elrain had ordered her out of bed at 2 a.m. for a random inspection. The inspection involved having her personal notebook confiscated and her bedding tossed into the hallway. When Cassidy asked politely if she could retrieve it, Elrain slammed her against the wall and whispered in her ear. You think you're special? You'll learn soon. Ain't no daddy's girl in here. By the morning, the rumor had already spread, Cassidy wasn't like the others. And that made her a target. It was on the third night that it got worse. While returning from the communal showers, someone, Cassidy never saw who, dumped a bucket of cleaning fluid laced with bleach from behind a door. It hit her back, shoulders, and part of her left cheek. She screamed from the sudden burning sensation, the chemical searing into her skin. Her towel dropped as she scrambled to the wall for balance. The guards responded, but slowly. Too slowly. Elrain arrived last, surveyed the scene, and made a show of rolling her eyes. Accidents happen, she said, then ordered Cassidy to walk it off. No medical attention was given for 6 hours. By then, angry red burns had formed along her shoulder blade and jawline. She was finally seen by a nurse, who gave her basic ointment and muttered something about toughening up. But someone else had noticed. Officer Tonika Voss, a younger guard new to the facility, had seen what happened from a nearby camera feed. She'd only been working there a few months and still believed the job was about protection, not punishment. That night, after lights out, she slipped Cassidy a cold pack wrapped in a towel and whispered through the bars. I know you're not supposed to be here. Just hang on. Someone's coming for you. I don't know who, but I can feel it. Cassidy didn't reply. Her voice was gone, buried beneath humiliation, pain, and exhaustion. But something about the way Tonika said it made her blink back tears, not of fear this time, but of hope. Miles away, in a secure DOJ command room, Briel Bainbrook stared at surveillance photos of Elrain and several staffers. A forensic auditor briefed him on significant red flags, in prison expenditures, falsified overtime, unreported incidents, and personal payments received from unknown third-party contractors. All traced back to Vantel Youth Holdings. But the most chilling discovery came from internal maintenance logs. Sir, the analyst said, someone disabled the hallway security camera exactly 12 minutes before the bleach attack. It was intentional. Briel stood in silence, one hand clenched around the edge of the table. Set the chain in motion, he said coldly. Prepare an emergency civil rights probe. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply turned to the wall where a map of juvenile correctional facilities hung and drew a black X across Springcloud Detention Center. The countdown had begun. Cassidy Bainbrook lay on the thin cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling as the dim overhead light buzzed like a dying insect. Her hands, still sore from the too tight cuffs, were folded on her chest. It had been 4 days since her arrest, and she had stopped crying. Not because she was okay, but because she was adapting. Survival demanded it. Her cellmate, a quiet girl named Yolinda, barely spoke a word. The guards here didn't encourage conversation. In fact, most of them discouraged it through subtle threats or cold stares. But the real danger wasn't in silence, it was in being noticed. Cassidy had already caught the attention of Officer Elrain, a heavy-set woman with a smirk that never reached her eyes. Elrain seemed to take special pleasure in punishing girls who thought they were better than everyone else. And Cassidy, with her articulate speech, polished manners, and refusal to cower, fit that category perfectly. On her second night, Elrain had ordered her out of bed at 2 a.m. for a random inspection. The inspection involved having her personal notebook confiscated and her bedding tossed into the hallway. When Cassidy asked politely if she could retrieve it, Elrain slammed her against the wall and whispered in her ear. "You think you're special? You'll learn soon. Ain't no daddy's girl in here." By the morning, the rumor had already spread, Cassidy wasn't like the others. And that made her a target. It was on the third night that it got worse. While returning from the communal showers, someone, Cassidy never saw who, dumped a bucket of cleaning fluid laced with bleach from behind a door. It hit her back, shoulders, and part of her left cheek. She screamed from the sudden burning sensation, the chemical searing into her skin. Her towel dropped as she scrambled to the wall for balance. The guards responded, but slowly. Too slowly. Elrain arrived last, surveyed the scene, and made a show of rolling her eyes. "Accidents happen," she said, then ordered Cassidy to walk it off. No medical attention was given for 6 hours. By then, angry red burns had formed along her shoulder blade and jawline. She was finally seen by a nurse, who gave her basic ointment and muttered something about toughening up. But someone else had noticed. Officer Tonika Voss, a younger guard new to the facility, had seen what happened from a nearby camera feed. She'd only been working there a few months and still believed the job was about protection, not punishment. That night, after lights out, she slipped Cassidy a cold pack wrapped in a towel and whispered through the bars. "I know you're not supposed to be here. Just hang on. Someone's coming for you. I don't know who, but I can feel it." Cassidy didn't reply. Her voice was gone, buried beneath humiliation, pain, and exhaustion. But something about the way Tonika said it made her blink back tears, not of fear this time, but of hope. Miles away, in a secure DOJ command room, Brielle Bainbrook stared at surveillance photos of Elrain and several staffers. A forensic auditor briefed him on significant red flags, in prison expenditures, falsified overtime, unreported incidents, and personal payments received from unknown third-party contractors. All traced back to Vantel Youth Holdings. But the most chilling discovery came from internal maintenance logs. "Sir," the analyst said, "someone disabled the hallway security camera exactly 12 minutes before the bleach attack. It was intentional." Brielle stood in silence, one hand clenched around the edge of the table. "Set the chain in motion," he said coldly. "Prepare an emergency civil rights probe." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply turned to the wall where a map of juvenile correctional facilities hung and drew a black X across Springcloud Detention Center. The countdown had begun. Before the sun had fully risen over Springcloud, a dozen unmarked black vehicles began to converge on key locations throughout the town: Judge Calloway's private residence, the offices of Vantel Youth Holdings, and the Springcloud Juvenile Detention Center. Inside each vehicle were federal agents from the Department of Justice, the Office for Civil Rights, and the Internal Affairs Division. Every agent had a sealed copy of the warrant personally authorized by a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Briel Bainbrook stood at the center of the coordination team inside a secure mobile command unit. He was calm, composed, dressed in a navy blue suit with no insignia or badge, but his voice carried the weight of authority. "Priority 1 is my daughter's immediate extraction and safety," he said to the field commander. "Priority 2, contain all evidence and secure every terminal, every file, every server. No one gets tipped off." The team nodded. The operation, codenamed Iron Veil, was officially in motion. At exactly 7:15 a.m., agents stormed the Springcloud Juvenile Detention Center through two entrances. Officer Tonica Voss was on duty and saw the black-clad agents sweep past the main hallway like a wave. For a brief moment, she thought they were there to suppress a riot. Then she saw the Department of Justice patches. Her breath caught. It was real. Meanwhile, Officer L. Rain was in the break room sipping coffee when two agents burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them. You are under federal investigation," one shouted. L. Rain froze, cup shattering on the floor. She didn't even resist. Down in cell block C, Cassidy was reading a worn paperback when the electronic lock on her cell clicked. For a second, she feared it was another inspection. But then Tonica appeared, out of breath, a new kind of urgency in her eyes. "Come with me," she said. "Now." "What's going on?" Cassidy asked, heart racing. "You're being extracted. Federal order." Cassidy stumbled to her feet, stunned. She followed Tonica through the corridors now buzzing with activity, officers being cuffed, computers being seized, files ripped from drawers. Agents moved like a disciplined swarm. At the front lobby, a tall man in a clean suit stood waiting. It took her a second to recognize him. Then her voice cracked. "Dad?" Briel didn't wait. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. "I'm here," he said softly. "You're coming home." Tears flooded her eyes. "They said I'd never get out. They said no one would believe me." "Well," he whispered, "they were wrong. And now everyone will know." As Briel walked her out, reporters had already gathered outside the gates. News helicopters hovered above. Word had gotten out that the U.S. Attorney General had led a secret operation to shut down a corrupt juvenile facility and arrest a sitting judge. It was already being called one of the most explosive federal actions in a generation. Elsewhere, Judge Grace Calloway was dragged from her gated estate in a silk robe, shouting about fabricated accusations and federal overreach. But agents ignored her. Inside her safe, they found offshore account statements, burner phones, and a list of over 50 minors she had sentenced directly to Vantel facilities, many of them now injured, traumatized, or worse. At Vantel headquarters, servers were being mirrored, financial records cross-referenced. Federal auditors found millions in undocumented payouts, shell company transfers, and secret emails between Calloway and senior executives. By nightfall, the operation was complete. The detention center was shut down permanently. Vantel's national contract was suspended pending full investigation. Calloway was in federal custody, awaiting arraignment on charges ranging from bribery to civil rights violations. And Cassidy, bandaged and exhausted, sat in a hotel room next to her father, wrapped in a warm blanket, eating real food for the first time in weeks. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You stopped them. For everyone." Briel looked at her, his brilliant, brave daughter, and for the first time in his career, he allowed himself to cry. Not out of sorrow, but out of pride. Cassidy Bainbrook sat in a high-backed leather chair inside a private medical suite in Washington, D.C., 2 weeks after her extraction from Springcloud. Her burns were healing slowly, the redness fading into soft scars along her shoulder and cheek. A therapist sat across from her, gently guiding her through a session focused on trauma recovery. But her thoughts weren't on her injuries. They were on justice. She had spent nights replaying the events, not with fear anymore, but with purpose. What had happened to her wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a systemic disease. And she knew now, more than ever, that silence was complicity. In another part of the city, Briel Bainbrook stood before the House Judiciary Committee, testifying in an emergency session about the corruption uncovered in SpringCloud. His tone was precise, deliberate. Before him were rows of senators and congresspeople, all riveted by the weight of what had happened under their very noses. Judge Grace Calloway abused her position to funnel children, predominantly children of color, into a private detention pipeline for profit, he said. My daughter was almost another statistic. I will not allow this to be buried under political formalities. Gasps echoed through the chamber when Briel presented the audio recordings from Alan Stanton and the financial data that proved direct collusion between the judge and Vantel Youth Holdings. Some senators looked down in shame. Others began furiously taking notes. Across the country, the media exploded with the story. News anchors called it the Bainbrook scandal, while civil rights organizations referred to it as the SpringCloud injustice. Protesters gathered outside juvenile facilities in multiple states, demanding audits and independent oversight. Parents whose children had been sentenced by Calloway came forward, their stories tragically similar: thin evidence, harsh punishments, lives destroyed before they had begun. But none were more powerful than Cassidy's voice. Just 10 days after her release, she agreed to be interviewed on national television. Wearing a modest navy blazer and soft makeup that didn't cover her scars, she sat opposite a respected journalist and shared her story, not with anger, but with quiet, controlled fury. I want people to understand that I wasn't exceptional, she said. I was lucky. My father had power. Most girls like me don't. They disappear into a system that profits from their silence. Her interview sparked a storm. Petitions for nationwide judicial reform gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. Legal scholars debated the ethics of privately run juvenile detention centers. For the first time in years, legislative attention was on the youth justice system, not as a tool of punishment, but as a system demanding reconstruction. Meanwhile, in a federal courtroom in D.C., the trial against Judge Grace Calloway began. The prosecution moved swiftly, armed with evidence so airtight it left little room for defense. The most damning moment came when the court played her voice saying, "This Bainbrook girl will do just fine." The jury took less than 4 hours to deliver a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts: bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and multiple civil rights violations. As she was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, reporters clamored for a statement. She said nothing. Her fall from grace was absolute. Cassidy watched the trial from a side room with her father. When the verdict came down, she didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply whispered, "That's one down." Briel turned to her. "There will be others," he said. She nodded, her expression calm, steady. "Then we keep going." And in that moment, he realized, his daughter wasn't just a survivor. She was becoming a warrior. 1 year later, the sun rose over Washington, D.C. with the soft gold light of early spring, and the city buzzed with anticipation. In a packed auditorium at Howard University, a banner stretched across the stage: Youth Justice Reform Summit, honoring resilience, demanding change. The room was filled with lawmakers, educators, advocates, and students. But all eyes were fixed on one person approaching the podium: Cassidy Bainbrook. She was 17 now, taller, more composed, her scars barely visible beneath her skin but fully present in her words. The auditorium fell silent as she took a breath and looked out over the audience. "A year ago," she began, "I was sitting in a detention cell, accused of a crime I didn't commit, isolated, terrified, and nearly erased by a system that profits off the destruction of children. Today, I stand here not as a victim, but as proof that exposure can lead to change." Applause broke, but she held up her hand gently. "I don't tell my story for sympathy. I tell it because there are thousands who will never get the chance to speak, because they're still behind bars, or because they didn't survive." The crowd went silent again, struck by the gravity of her words. Behind her on the screen appeared a slide show of names, youths sentenced under Calloway's gavel, their photos, their brief stories. Cassidy continued. "Reform is not about protecting the innocent, it's about changing a system that never gave us a chance to be seen as anything but guilty. And if I can fight it, so can every student in this room. So can every mother, every father, every teacher. It starts with truth. And it ends with accountability." By the time she stepped down from the podium, several lawmakers had already committed to co-sponsoring new legislation. The Youth Justice Integrity Act, drafted in part by Brielle Bainbrook and reviewed by a panel of wrongfully incarcerated youth, was scheduled to be voted on in the summer. Outside the auditorium, Cassidy was greeted with handshakes, hugs, and tearful thanks. A young boy, maybe 12, walked up to her wearing a borrowed suit and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Cassidy knelt beside him and replied, "No. You'll be better." Later that evening, she and her father returned home. Their townhouse in D.C. was quiet, filled with books, newspaper clippings, and framed letters from students across the country. On one wall hung a certificate of commendation from the President of the United States. On another, a shadow box containing the orange jumpsuit Cassidy had worn in juvenile detention, now retired, now powerless. They had dinner together, something simple. Brielle watched his daughter with pride that no award or position had ever given him. She was no longer the girl he once tried to protect in silence. She had grown into someone the world needed to hear. After dinner, Cassidy walked to her room, opened her laptop, and continued drafting a college application essay. The title read, "When the System Forgot I Was Human." She was applying to Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, all with offers already extended. Her first choice, Harvard Law. She didn't want vengeance anymore. She wanted the gavel. And when she got it, she swore she'd use it to rebuild the world that tried to break her. In my view, the ending of this story is not just a resolution, it's a declaration. It's a reminder that justice is not static, it is something we must fight for, protect, and constantly redefine. Cassidy's transformation from a silenced victim to a rising voice for reform is a testament to resilience, but also to the brutal cost of systemic failure. The fact that it took the power of the U.S. Attorney General to expose a corrupt local system reveals a painful truth: many others like Cassidy may never have a champion with that kind of reach. That's what gives the ending both its weight and its hope. Because Cassidy doesn't just walk free, she walks forward. Toward law, toward leadership, toward becoming the very change the system was designed to resist. She doesn't want revenge, she wants a better future. And that's far more powerful. It's a heavy story, but it ends the only way it should, not with silence, but with a voice that can no longer be ignored.